Welcome to Storytelling Time with Vanessa Y. Rogers. I am the host of Fabric of Folklore podcast, and this week we are doing a story, Sun, Moon, and Talia. This is a precursor to the Sleeping Beauty story that Disney made and that we all know. And this is a story that was written in the 1600s, 1630s by an Italian poet and courtier named Giambattista Basile. And it's an incredibly wild story. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the politics after the story because he has some really clear, interesting messaging that you're going to want to understand after this wild story. So there is a great lord and lady, and they have a beautiful daughter, newborn daughter. And they're so happy with this lovely daughter that they've been gifted, until an astrologer comes and warns them that, in fact, their daughter is doomed by flax, which flax is a material that was made into thread, and that is how they made clothing. So flax was really essential to the time period, and most women would have it in their households with their spinning wheels. But the Lord decided no more flax. No flax in our entire estate. So he bans flax and he bans spinning wheels to keep his daughter safe. One day, however, when she is a teenager, she is wandering around the estate and she comes across an old woman that she's never seen before. She's at a spinning wheel, which has never been at the estate, and the old lady is spinning flax. And Talia is, of course, curious because this is a novel thing that she's never seen before. And so she asked the old lady, "Can I try?" And of course, the old lady lets her sit down and try the flax in the spinning wheel. And lo and behold, the flax gets under her nail and Talia goes into a deep, dark sleep. The nobleman thinks that Talia is actually dead, but instead of having her buried, he has her placed into an estate far, far away where he has servants watching over her. Now, in her dream state, a king is riding by on his horse. He's hunting with his hawk, and the hawk flies into the open window, and so the king has to follow the hawk into her bedroom, and he sees this beautiful maiden laid out on her bed, and he is just smitten. His heart is taken over by lust, and he has to have relations with her. So he has relations with a sleeping woman on the bed and leaves and goes back to his kingdom. 9 months later, Talia delivers 2 children while she's still asleep. The servants there are helping to take care of the children, and the sleeping children are lying down next to their mother, who is still not awoken, and mistakes her finger for a nipple and sucks on the finger, and the flax comes out from under her nail, and Talia awakens, and she is in a strange room surrounded by servants and by babies. Who are these babies that are next to her? The servants have to explain who the babies are. She names her babies Sun and Moon, and the king eventually comes by and he says, "Hi, I'm the father of these beautiful babies." And he falls more madly and deeply in love with her. But there is a problem because he is already married. He already has a queen. And so he cannot marry Talia, who he proclaims to be the love of his life. So he goes back to his queen, and the queen begins to suspect that the king is not being faithful, and she is able to pull it out of the king's secretary and discovers that Talia, Sun, and Moon, where they live, and she has them brought to the castle without the king's knowledge. She brings the children to the chef and says, "Take these children, chop them up, and put them in stew and feed them to my husband." And then she has a giant pit dug in the front of the castle, and inside this pit she has poisonous snakes and venomous frogs and biting lizards all placed into this giant pit. She sits down to dinner with the child stew and taunts her husband as he eats every last bite. He finishes his delicious meal and is unclear about why his queen has such a devious look on her face. She goes out into the courtyard without inviting her husband, where Talia is in front of the pit of venomous creatures and demands that Talia jumps into the pit because she is an adulteress. Talia is completely terrified, but she has a plan. She asks the queen if she might take off her beautiful gown so that it is not destroyed. The queen, in her rage, her jealous rage, decides that yes, that is a beautiful gown, and in fact, she wants Talia's garments, and so she allows this request. Talia, with every single garment she takes off, screams in grief and sorrow as loud as she can. And as she's on her very last garment and is stark naked in front of this pit of venomous vipers and creatures, the king runs out to save his beloved, stops Talia from jumping into the pit, and demands that his wife, the queen, and the cook and anyone else involved in the plot has to jump into the pit. The queen has told the king that, in fact, for dinner, he's had his 2 beautiful children, not a normal meat stew as he thought he was eating. But the chef comes out and says, no, I did not cook your children. I saved them. They are at my house, safe and sound. And so the chef is not demanded to jump into the pit, but the queen has to jump into the pit. And the king is now free to marry the love of his life, Talia. They move into the house and live happily ever after. Now, this is an incredibly disturbing tale. I'm not going to talk about everything that's going on. I speak on it a lot more in our episode, the Fairy Tale Flip episode 19, where Donna and I talk about all the different versions of Sleeping Beauty, which is definitely worth listening to. But what is happening in this story is that Basile is using fairy tales as a subversive way in which to talk about atrocious behavior that he's seeing amongst the nobility, right? He's touching on all these themes that are current and themes that are running throughout modern day of his time, the 1600s: tyranny, hypocrisy, predatory and prey behavior, sexual assault, gender roles, unequal gender roles, and political decay. These are all things that he sees as problematic. And because there is no free speech at the time, if you were to speak out against the king, if you were to speak out against this type of noble behavior that is seen as what is done without any consequences, the consequence for speaking out against this is jail or beheading. And so his way of critiquing is using what is called satirical allegory, Baroque excess. And he's doing it so that he can expose the corruption in this fairy tale format, mocking the hypocrisy that he sees from the nobility. He's writing this for adult audiences. It's not written for children. And he's contrasting these different elements, the grotesque elements with the ornate prose. So he's using metaphors and lush language and double meanings. He's taking humorous tones and pairing it with horrific acts so that his audience really understands that what he's saying is not his message. The story itself at the end, the king and the queen, the king and Talia, live happily ever after. But it's not really happily ever after if he's taken advantage of her and she has to live with the man who she knows raped him during her sleep. And so this is means for people of the time to speak out against this type of behavior. So like I said before, if you want to hear more about the different versions of Sleeping Beauty and how they were propped up as messages, it's a really fascinating episode. I definitely recommend you listening to the full thing, episode 19, Fairy Tale Flip, on the Fabric of Folklore podcast. Once again, my name is Vanessa Rogers. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell if you're watching on YouTube so that you get notifications every time our episodes download. And until next time, keep the folk alive and fairy tales.